Does size matter? Yes, it does, but not how you're thinking. Hello there, Thack from Thack Ironworks. Welcome to my channel. How are you doing, everybody? Today I'm going to talk a little bit about tongs. I had some comments, and a guy was asking me some technical questions regarding tongs and their design, so I thought I would just do a quick walkthrough of just some design elements of a pair of tongs and what's involved with that. And that reminded me, I have in the back of my shop, I had this pair of tongs that a friend of mine gave me. He was a blacksmith and someone gave them to him, and as a blacksmith he couldn't turn it down, even though they are totally impractical for most blacksmith shop. Even my shop, this has no use here. So this is a large pair of tongs that was designed, I would assume, for a steel mill, and it could have been used up till very recently. They're probably still being used in certain steel mills. And you can see that this is a pair of tongs that grab something about 6 inches in diameter, maybe 8 inches. I would say probably, looks like more like 8 or 10. So really big chunk of steel. And the important thing with tongs is having it fit properly to the stock that you're using. So these would have, I can see they've got some numbers on it. It says 612, which would have been an in-shop coating method for that size, for whatever size of stock that they're trying to hold. These would be the appropriate size tongs. Anyway, let's talk about some of the elements of a pair of tongs. Because these are so big, you can kind of see things very nicely here. One of the important things, let's talk about the reins, the actual handles of the tongs. For strength, they should start out with a rectangular cross section in the immediately behind the pivot point there, and that gives it a lot of lateral strength. So we've got something that's rectangular here, so it's got some real meat there, and being rectangular in this way, I don't know how to articulate this, sorry, but it's a stronger shape. As it gets out to where the hands hold it, I find it should taper into a nice, smooth, round bar, and that just tends to be the most comfortable shape to fit into the hands and work quite nicely. I'm going to put these big guys down here. All right, so here is a variety of tongs. Let's get right back to the size thing. This is probably the most used pair of tongs in this shop. And whenever I need it, I just go to Fish's Anvil because I know he's using them. It's a very handy shape. These are just V-bit tongs, but they're tiny. But we're often using, like when we're holding bolts or very small pieces, awkward little S-hooks and things like that. This is just our go-to pair of tongs. The reason, because it fits small stuff very well, and it's also they're short and comfortable, they're light, they're just very easy to use. So that is one of the perfect criteria for a pair of tongs. They need to be light and comfortable enough to be able to use. Using tongs is always, it's a compromise. It's not optimal for what you want to do. Ideally, you'd like to be holding on to the actual bar so you can work with it, and you've got a lot better leverage that way. You've got a real intimate hold on that piece. Using tongs is always going to be a bit of a compromise, but if you have to use them, they should fit very well to that piece, and they should be comfortable to use. What you don't want is something big and clunky with big heavy reins that is just going to weigh the whole thing down. They'll be uncomfortable to use, and then subconsciously you will avoid using them more because they don't function very well. Well, I'm looking at this pair of tongs here. This is kind of what's known as the wolf jaw style tongs, which has a bunch of different configurations to hold various types of stock. And a lot of beginners are really brainwashed into thinking, you know, I've got to have a pair of tongs that can hold every sort of stock. It's kind of like a Swiss Army knife. There's going to be compromises made if you're trying to do too many things with one tool. I think it's better to have 3 pair of tongs that do specific functions, and you're probably going to get a much more optimum holding with that style or that approach to it. So I always think your general tong should be something, V-bit tongs or something, that's probably going to be your main go-to. You would need a pair of ring tongs to grab stuff laterally, or to be able to grab a ring, and then the other one would be blade tongs. And these are called box jaw tongs or blade tongs. The idea being that it's got these little ears on here to grab a piece of flat stock. the flat stock holes in there and doesn't shoot out the side. What you don't want to be doing is grabbing stuff with just a flat pair of tongs, and as you hold it sideways, it's just going to kick out on you. So those would be your 3 basic ones that you want. Sometimes, occasionally, I will put balls on the end of the tongs. They're not totally necessary. If you've got a properly fitted set of tongs that are going to close onto a piece, they should close that there's tension on the hand when they're in their under tension position, that they're closed onto the piece and you've got some room there, that they're not pinching together. If they're ill-fitting tongs, sometimes they're going to pinch together, sometimes they'll grab your hand. You can prevent that by putting balls on there, and if they're symmetrical and knocked together, they're going to touch before the reins touch. So unlike the human male, where you'd actually like the balls offset a little bit so they don't do that, not ideal. On these, that's what you want. The reason that there are balls on the end of tongs is usually not for that. They're for the bigger pairs of tongs, things in a foundry, usually I think is the design, or bigger steel mills, where you're actually grabbing a pair of tongs and they might slide down your hand because you're carrying something quite heavy, and you might be swinging it like that. So the balls are something to grab it so they don't shoot out of your hands there. So that's, I believe, what the original purpose for that is. I think they look cool, and I sometimes put them on tongs, and they do have that added benefit of avoiding pinching the hand. Other things, I've got these tongs here, which I've had for many years. They've got skulls on them, and I don't know if he's getting focus on there. I call these the kissing skull tongs. They have that same effect. This one happens to have a ring on, and we use that for making these into medieval vice grips. So for example, I can take this piece of 1/2 inch round here, and with these tongs and with a ring on there, when I bring that, squeeze it under tension, bring the ring back, now I've got something that will hold a piece of steel there. That is handy if you're doing a lot of work, and we'll often do this if we are texturing a long piece of steel for a picket, for a railing or something like that in the power hammer. It's just nice, rather than having to grip on there and it's fatiguing on your hands after a while, it's nice to put the ring on there and you can just kind of relax in your grip there. Don't have to hold it as heavily that way. So that is kind of a handy thing for tongs. This is a pair of tongs that I just custom made for a farrier. This old Amish guy that does a lot of bigger shoes, and he asked to have a pair of tongs like this made. This brings me to the point of the function of tongs is if you can have it as close to the pivot point as possible, you're going to have a lot more leverage there. These tongs are designed to hold heavy flat stock, something maybe 3/8 or 1/2 inch, with a cup in the middle there so that they're holding on the outside. And these give a good positive hold because the leverage point is so close to the pivot there, and then when you get on there and torque down on these, that you've got some good holding power for working on shoes. And this shape, I guess, I've never done shoes, so lends itself to working around all the aspects of making a horseshoe. So those are specifically for that. These are my sheet metal tongs. I use these when I'm doing armor and stuff. So it's just got a flat bearing surface on there to grab the steel, and it's quite handy. A lot of guys will use vice grips. I just find this is handy because you can move it around quickly during a heat, and I find them very nice to use. This shape here is for grabbing oddly shaped pieces, say like a bolt, for example, something that would have a head in there. You've got this going out of the way to be able to grab that. So you can see there's different extremes that you can go to with that shape. Understanding that every time you start coming out like that, that you might be compromising the gripping power as you get out to there. The crazier you get on your shape there, there's going to be a compromise in that sort of leverage. So that's something you got to keep in mind. Here's a pair of pickup tongs that have a short pivot point, so they're good for grabbing something where you need to really get a good grip on it. Whereas here we've got a pair of pickup tongs that are handy for grabbing different rounds, and realize that if you're grabbing something here, you can pick up something light, but you don't have a whole lot of torque on there because you're so far from the pivot point. Incidentally, a lot of beginners think they need to get pickup tongs. You don't really need them. You can pick up stuff with your V-bit tongs. Pickup tongs are kind of a luxury item. They look cool, and they're kind of handy when you're doing stuff, you're doing a lot of that. But you need to pick up steel, you've got a bunch of other options. More important to get some tongs that actually hold steel that you need to work with. Here is an example of two not so well designed tongs. This pair here, I don't know where they came from. I didn't make these. I would not claim to have made these. It's only got a 1/4 inch rivets, so pretty wimpy as far as the rivet goes. The pivot point is way back here, and they don't work very well. Really crudely built, and just not a great pair of tongs. Really heavy in your reins for the size of stock that you've got here. So just a very clumsy pair of tongs, and they don't even move very well. I would just get rid of those. I don't like them. This pair, I think we originally built them years ago to have something that was for holding stuff that was quite heavy. So we kept the reins very heavy, thinking that would make it stronger, but I just found that they were very uncomfortable, awkward to use. I'd rather have something that slimmed down a little bit there, even though that, you know, you don't have quite the strength on there. It's always that trade-off. You want to have the lightest possible pair of tongs that's going to hold the piece securely. I found that this was just on the heavy side for what its function was. Brings to mind Brian Brazil, who does a lot of hammers, and I've seen his tongs, and he does tongs out of spring steel, which I've never tried yet. But for holding hammer heads and axe heads, he's got fairly light seeming pair of tongs, very light, but with the springiness of them, they're able to hold that piece and get it into position, rather than having something to hold those big pieces that would be big and clunky and awkward to use. So that is another design consideration, that you have to make the appropriate tool for the appropriate work, but it has to be something that you can handle comfortably and hold securely. I think that's about it. I might have been just rambling on there a lot. I think I've covered quite a bit of this. You might have some more questions, leave them in the comments below. We can always do another video and revisit this whole thing. We're gonna probably be doing a new video on making of tongs, as our production value has gone up quite a bit since we've done the earlier build videos for tongs. So look forward to that in the future. In the meantime, please subscribe and tune in for future videos. We have lots coming up. So that's it. Back out. See ya!